During the 1990s, I worked as a computer consultant for small law firms in the area of Adelaide and York in downtown Toronto. My BlackBerry was a constant companion attached to my hip or beside me on the table. It was very useful in allowing me to respond to the problems of impatient lawyers and their increasingly complex computer tools. It was a busy and challenging time. By 1998, I was feeling very much burned out. I had too many clients and was running myself into bad health. So, I made a change. I dumped most of my clients and began to work full-time as an in-house systems manager for a 50-person law firm in that same area of downtown Toronto. In 1999, I purchased and moved into a small condo at 168 Simcoe Street, Toronto, which was just across University Avenue from the law firm, so very convenient. It was called Q West, and I watched it being built. I set up a small home office here with the computer tools I needed to support my work with the law firm and my new interest in genealogy. It was in 2000 that I started doing serious genealogy research. In the previous year or so, I had done my first deep dive research project related to a relative of mine, Donald Goodfellow of Mount Olivet, there northeast of Codrington. He had been a bomb aimer in a Halifax that was lost on a bombing raid to Berlin in February 1944. This work demonstrated clearly to me that I did not know my own family history, and that annoyed me a lot. I figure I had better do something about it. On the other hand, I also needed a balancing activity to keep me from burning out at computer consulting. As it turns out, genealogy was perfect for that. For most of a decade, I routinely walked up University Avenue from the law firm late in the afternoon. My destination was the reading room of the Archives of Ontario on Grenville Street. That was before the archives moved up to York University. I would spend several hours with my head stuck inside microfilm machines, recording details with pencil on paper. I learned how to deal with such arcane archival collections as registrations for births, deaths, and marriages, census records, and land registry records. Records related to Crown land petitions were particularly difficult, but potentially groundbreaking. I collected a lot of data. When I got back home after supper, I sat at the computer and processed the new information into my genealogy database. The result was that my database grew and grew. By 2004, I realized that I could accomplish more by sharing my information with other researchers. In order to accomplish this, I created the website called www.treesbydan.com. But make no mistake, I can't take credit for the name. That came from the mind of my brother-in-law, Tom. I simply looked at it and said, sure, that's perfect. Every day I enter new information into the database on my computer using the software, the Master Genealogist. In order to get all of my research information from my database onto the internet, I follow this procedure. Every 3 or 4 months, I run the software called Second Sight to create an HTML version of the data, one that will work effectively on a website. After that, all the HTML files that were generated are uploaded to the domain called Trees by Dan. In the genealogy software, images of gravestones are linked to the records of individual people. So all of these images are also uploaded to the website into a separate folder. After more than 2 decades of doing this, my database contains records for well over 113,000 people, including lots of history information for individuals related to my history stories. In fact, it has become my habit to identify the people related to a story and document their family trees before I start writing the story. This allows me to understand the context of the people in the story, and I like to think it makes for richer stories. This was particularly important during the development of my 3 books. By 2009, I was really sick of downtown Toronto and wanted to do a lot more on local history around Brighton. An arrangement was made by which I could move to Brighton but continue to support the law firm remotely over the internet. In the summer of 2010, I moved to Brighton along with my sister Mary Lou and my brother-in-law Tom. I purchased a freehold townhome on Chapel Street that was being built as I watched. I set up a spacious home office in the finished basement, which was designed to support both my computer consulting and history work. My unit was 12 Chapel Street, just across from the new offices and activity space of Trinity St. Andrew's United Church. In the spring of 2015, I was wondering if that humongous snowbank in my front yard was ever going to melt. Soon after moving to Brighton, I began to use the label The History Guy of Brighton. I took this on deliberately as a brand name that describes my role perfectly. But again, I can't take credit for the name. One day, I was walking down the sidewalk in Brighton, and a lady stopped well down the street. She pointed at me, then walked purposely toward me, wagging her finger. I figured I was in big trouble. When she got close, she stopped, still wagging her finger, and said, I don't remember your name. You're that history guy." Much relieved, I agreed with her and tried to answer her question. On the way home, I could not get that name out of my head. I had been thinking of a way to identify myself in the context of marketing for my events and projects, and this seemed tailor-made. I have been the history guy of Brighton ever since. Not long after moving to Brighton, I connected with the Brighton Heritage Advisory Committee. In the fall of 2012, I pitched to them the idea of having an event called the Brighton History Open House. I had been to history fairs, shows, and displays before, and felt something like that might work in Brighton. I explained that we wanted to have an event at the large community centre, where historians, museums, and such from the community would set up displays. It would be open to everyone at no cost, and the hope was that folks in and around Brighton might come together to talk and learn about local history. We were asking for no money, just a chance to do something for the community. The committee members liked the idea, so we had approval to proceed. A small group came together to manage the event. Besides myself, the group included local historians, Florence Chatton and Susan Brose, as well as Dot Conley, who was a member of the Heritage Advisory Committee and acted as liaison with our group. We had our first event in February 2013, which was a real success. There was a big crowd, and the buzz in the room was electric. In fact, it was made clear to us even before the event was over that this must be an annual event. The first event had unexpectedly developed into a public speaking opportunity where I stood in front of folks and told history stories. If we were going to do the same next year, that meant that I would have to find a history story to tell at History Open House 2014. I wonder what story that might be. In fact, my approach to the Dr. King story had evolved. Up to that time, I had avoided bringing this story out into the public in order to avoid disturbing first my grandfather and then my father. Lloyd Ames passed away in 1993, and my father, Reverend Charles Buchanan, in 2012. Now, I felt I would not be ruffling too many family feathers by dealing with the Dr. King story in public. Also, after I moved back to Brighton and started doing history events around the community, I experienced people coming up to me and telling me bits about the Dr. King story. These were widely varied stories that had passed down in their families through generations. Some of it was pretty crazy stuff, but I had not done the research myself, so I couldn't complain. Now I was ready to find out what had really happened. However, what put me over the top was this fellow. This is Roger McMurray, shown here at my displays during the 2014 History Open House. Roger was retired from a career in the military and had been an active collector for many years. Some might call him an auction hound. In more recent years, Roger was a member of Brighton Council. Sadly, Roger passed away in October of 2021. Several years before I moved back to Brighton in 2010, Roger had contacted me about a collection of items he had acquired at an auction in Campbellford. He believed that this collection was related to the King family of Codrington, and he recognized its importance in the context of Brighton history. He had even taken steps to acquire a second part of the collection, which he had not been able to purchase at the sale. He was able to track it down and purchase it in order to keep the entire collection together. Unfortunately, I was extremely busy at work at that time, so I couldn't follow up on this tantalizing find. Thankfully, Roger had not forgotten. When he heard about the History Open House in February of 2013, he decided to take action. Later in the afternoon of the History Open House 2013, Roger came to the Proctor House Museum display and said he had something of interest to show them. He opened an old wooden fold-up writing desk and revealed a treasure trove. There were old photo albums, documents, and many loose photographs, all pertaining to the King family of Codrington. The folks at the Proctor House display sent for me, and I hurried over, and I was blown away. However, the show was really busy at that time, so Roger and I agreed to meet at a later date to discuss what might be done with the collection. In the meantime, I imagined what wonderful things were in the collection. What was inside those two very old, large family photo albums I had seen in the collection? These were from my own ancestors, and I had never seen them before. Gladly, a few months later, an agreement was reached whereby Roger would donate the King collection to Proctor House Museum. We agreed to hold a major event where I would tell the Dr. King story in conjunction with History Open House 2014. This would include a display of some of the artifacts from the collection. Roger also wanted to make a dedication to his parents, and we agreed to schedule that after the intermission of the storytelling event. So, we set about planning for a very interesting History Open House 2014.